Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, India's Enchanting Wild Birds, presented by NatHab expedition leaders Conan Dumenil and Surya Ramachandran. Guys, thank you both for being here today. We really appreciate it. I'll turn it over to you, Conan.
Right. Thank you, Colby. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining in. It's wonderful to be back again here. Tonight for us, today for you, we are coming to you from a very special place. It's a rainy night here in the Western Ghats, a region known for its biodiversity and also great cup of tea. So grab a cup and join us while we take you through a short journey of what India has to offer in its feathered wonders. So I'll turn it over to Surya, who will get us started.
Thank you, Conan. Great. So what we are trying to do today, because the whole topic of Indian birds is quite a vast subject, and I don't think we'll be able to cover all of it tonight. But we thought we'll bring forth some interesting stories for all of you to kind of think about, and stories that give you a larger perspective of the diversity and the conservation issues and the conservation success stories that the country faces in terms of its bird life. But before we get into the stories and the birds as such, we really need to know a little bit about how we got here over the centuries in terms of documenting and studying Indian birds. So that's what I would like to start with. Of course, the star of the Indian jungles is the Bengal tiger. Almost every wildlife person, including a birder who comes to India, is always here for the first time in India to see a tiger, and only then will they go looking for the birds. And even those who think of birds in India, the first bird that comes to everyone's mind, including ours for that matter, is of course the peacock, the beautiful peacock, which dances at the onset of the monsoon showers, something like now. And the male spreads its tail feathers and dances and displays to the female. So it's always a beautiful sight to watch peacocks. But is that the end of the story? I mean, that's something that is kind of what we want to talk about today. So there is a lot more to offer in India, and a lot of very pretty birds and a lot of very interesting birds that call India home. So this artwork by a friend of mine, Rohan, who runs this company called Green Humor, kind of puts in perspective the different shapes and sizes of the species in India, and how all of these fit into this one single country, we will come to know in the next few slides. So before Rohan made that cartoon, and before I became a birder, and long before I was born, there were a few people who worked on birds. So ornithology and India have gone hand in hand for the last few centuries, right from the time of Mughals, who are known as very keen falconers. But they documented very limited behavior of certain birds. But beyond that, the studies really kicked off when India was under the British occupation, and the Brits, most of the officers had ornithology as a hobby. And some of them were very keen on sending specimens to natural history museums across the world. So what happened was when they were posted in different parts of India, they started documenting species. So throughout the 17th, 18th, and early 19th century, there was a huge collection of data in terms of bird life that happened across the country. But one of the key figures to note came after the Indian independence, and that is Dr. Salim Ali, who you see in the center in the series of pictures on the top. He is known as the father of Indian ornithology, and he meticulously documented birds across the country. He dedicated his life to going to different parts of the country and documenting birds, and he came up with the first handbook of birds of India and Pakistan, along with a friend of his, Dylan Ripley. So this is the first official book which documents birds in the Indian subcontinent. So this is where the journey started, and because of books like this is why people like Conan and me are birders today. But not everything was smooth. Not everything was great. Of course, there were fraudsters in history, and especially during the time when internet was not an option. When someone really changes the way things are done, there's going to be a lot of change in perspectives. So this man particularly, Richard Maynard Southern, really wanted to be a part of the British nobility. So what he did was he started switching samples to provide new record data of birds in places where they did not exist. And slowly, because of his work, he became very popular amongst nobility. But his work took many, many years, almost a century later. It was decoded as fraudulent work by people who actually studied his taxidermy style. And that actually kept a lot of birds, including me. I went looking for a bird called the Swamprinia next to Delhi because of the work by Richard Maynard Southern. But very recently, it was proven wrong, and it was proven that he was actually switching samples around. So there were hurdles like this to be crossed. But beyond all of that, today we actually have very, very good documentation of the Indian birds, especially by the lady to the right, Dr. Pamela Rasmussen. The cartoon in the center pretty much summarizes her life's work in a very, very clear manner. She's meticulously studying birds across the country. And from the time of Dr. Salim Ali's book in the 60s and 70s, we've come a long, long way in documenting Indian birds, along with other people, citizen scientists, ornithologists across the country. So this is kind of roughly how we came across finding India a place in the world map as a birding destination. But to jump more into India, I'd like to invite Conan, and he's going to try to explain how this bizarre country supports such a high bird diversity.
Yeah, bizarre is a nice word to use, Surya. When you live here long enough, you see the contrasts and the contradictions and the diversity within that, which makes not just in the people but in its natural history as well. So to quickly go through, let's start from a bird's eye view to put it in perspective. Right. So we're looking at India, a country that's nestled well within the tropics in the northern hemisphere, right? And in our country, we have a great variation in its geography and landscape. So starting off with, of course, one of the most iconic mountain ranges, the tallest and the youngest mountain range in the world, the Himalayas, which occupy our entire northern all the way up to the far eastern border of India. And then the high altitude desert or the Tibetan plateau that lies north of it. And then moving southwards, you land in the great river plains, such as the rivers of the Ganges and Brahmaputra, which form these massive alluvial deposits that makes a large part of North India so fertile because of these huge deposits that bring in from the mountains and these flat plains. Moving westward, we have deserts. We have the Thar Desert, which is contiguous into Pakistan. That's in the far west of the country, as you see. And then to the south of that, in the state of Gujarat, which looks like a little open mouth of a crocodile, is also a vast salt desert and arid landscape. Then when you move south, we have smaller mountain chains such as the Vindhyas and the Western Ghats, which is parallel to the western coast, where we are sitting right now, which plays such an important role with determining the climate of this country. So right from high altitude snow deserts all the way to tropical evergreen, lowland evergreen forests, huge wetlands, we have it all. And the map on the right will give you a kind of a 3D perspective of what the country is. Now, with this huge diversity in geography, you could naturally expect huge diversity in a huge diversity in its natural denizens as well. Now, India has 1,332 recorded species of birds. Of course, as we heard, with modern science, more are being described better with new techniques, and especially with the introduction of DNA analyses. We have 79 endemic birds that call India their home, found nowhere else in the world, such as this black and orange flycatcher, which is from this region where we are in right now. It's a starbird here. We also have about 800 species of birds that are residents. Now, these are birds that don't migrate. They are found in other countries outside India as well, but these are non-migratory birds, right? So let's have a quick look. So what is migration? Why is that important? How does that, what happens, right? So we all know, well, the migration happens from northern hemispheres to the southern hemispheres during the change of season. There are two kinds of migrants that we see here in India. We see a lot of winter migrants, which a large chunk of birds use. And then we also have the passage migrants. Now, what are these two? Now, I would actually compare it to airline travelers. So a migrant is someone who travels from destination A to B, whereas a passage migrant is someone who's making a quick stop or a transit at an intermediate airport. So we get a lot of birds that also fall within the passage migrant category as well. Now, if you look at the migratory flyways across the world, we have three possible migratory flyways that happen in India. Most of them originate in Central Asia and Siberia, or right below the Arctic Circle, and go all the way down to the southern coast of Africa. And here's where we see a lot of our passage migrants. We have a large chunk that come down to India for their wintering grounds, to feed, to breed, and so on. And then we also have some coastal birds which use the eastern coastway and migrate all the way up to Australasia and the South Pacific. So let's look at one of our most iconic passage migrants, right? The Amur falcon. It's a fantastic raptor. It's a small raptor, about the size of a pigeon, and makes this amazing journey, close to about 20,000 odd kilometers or so every year, round trip, starting from southern Siberia, northern China, and parts of Mongolia, all the way down to the southern region of Africa. And they make this one stop, or one area which they like to visit in the far northeast corner of India, in the state of Nagaland and some of the neighboring states as well. And there's this beautiful lake situated in the foothills there, Pangti Lake, named after one of the villages there. And over centuries, they've been coming in the thousands. And it's just this one stop before they rest up, they roost for about a couple of weeks, and then take on this straight flight all the way down to Africa. Now, the interesting thing about this is that one of the events that prompt these birds to leave. Now, I said these were raptors, so they're a bird of prey, but they're a small bird of prey. And so they rely on hunting insects at the most. And one of these events that prompt these birds to leave after they've rested up, they've fed well, and move on is the migration of a particular species of dragonfly. And so once they see the dragonflies moving south, the birds follow. And it's understood that it's the ability to catch these dragonflies on the wing, and which sustains them across the journey from across the Arabian Sea all the way to Africa. Now, the region which the Amur falcon comes to in these phenomenal numbers is also a region that has depended a lot on hunting as a form of livelihood. And over the past few years, at least in our lifetime, we've seen a lot of rampant killing for the pot that happens by the local communities here. And we're not talking about a few hundred birds, we're talking about 10,000 birds a day over a span of a week that get hunted for the pot. And for the local communities there, which have got a very, very hard life, it is a good source of protein. It is food that's available in numbers, and for want of anything else better, they resort to that. But there's been several conservation initiatives over the past few years, especially in educating the locals in seeing value in these birds, promoting it as a place where you get tourists who can come and spend money and to watch this amazing natural history phenomenon. And it's thanks to these efforts, working with school children, working with villages across the region, we're now beginning to see numbers such as this. Now, Uh, like I said, there are few migrants that form this passageway, but a lot of our chunk of winter birds, which makes birding in this country so special, especially when you go on a trip like a Grand India tour, where it's set in winters. We see some of these winter specials. And Surya, why don't you tell us something about those?
Sure. Thanks, Conan. For those of you who are even remotely interested in birds, or even if you're not, at some point in your life, I think it should be on your bucket list to come and see the Amur falcons congregate at Pankti Lake in Nagaland. This happens roughly in the month of November, and that's when the stopover happens. And it's quite brilliant. But interestingly, the number of passage migrants which actually use India as a stopover and make the long journey further south is not as much, simply because they have a huge ocean to cross, and not all birds can manage that. Not all birds can do that like the Amur falcon. So India is actually a stopover point for a lot of winter migrants from the north, and also a lot of winter migrants which migrate from the Himalayas to other parts of India which are relatively milder in the peak winter months. So there is two of these migrations that happen, and also winter, like Conan was saying, is the time of plenty in India. So you have a lot more species that come into the country, augmenting the species list of the country by almost 20 to 30%, which is quite a big number going by India's list. So to talk about migration, to bring about a little bit of understanding of what a brilliant winter migration spectacle can be, I'd like to take you to the Thar Desert, the deserts of Western India. And this is where our story will unfold. But before that, a little bit about the Thar Desert. This is a dry, flat country. A lot of it is scrub jungle, a few sand dunes here and there, and you also have salt flats in this landscape. So this is a pretty much, and like Conan was saying, it's contiguous with the landscapes further west in Pakistan and further on. So this place, interestingly, because of its cultural history of nomadic communities, which always roam the landscape because water is scarce, and most of these livestock herders were nomadic. And because culturally some of them were Hindus, the cattle which died on the journey were always discarded in the desert. So because of this, an interesting thing happened. A lot of the raptor migration in India started focusing towards Western India and the deserts. So a picture like this is even common today if you go to certain parts of Rajasthan, where you can even see sometimes 100 or 200 vultures and other species of raptors congregating in certain areas where the cattle carcasses are dumped. So this is a very interesting spectacle. And just to give you an idea of some of the really cool raptors that we have in the Thar Desert, you can see the really big, very, very mighty looking imperial eagle on the right. And of course, we have peregrine falcons and different species of owls that come here. But do you think because of the change in lifestyle of the people, the raptors numbers should have dropped? Maybe they have. I'm not that old to know the numbers across time. But there is one other major reason why raptors migrate to the desert, and that is these small bits of oases that are there in the desert. There are small wetlands, marshes. These places, though they're just tiny dots in the desert, what happens is they support such a high species diversity, especially in the winter months, because a lot of the migrants winter in these small landscapes, and the raptors congregate around them. So it makes for great hunting grounds for them, and also a great habitat for many birds altogether. So in one of these oases is where our story happens. This is a small village in Rajasthan called Kichan. And the birds you see flying in the sky over here are demoiselle cranes. So demoiselle cranes are very interesting birds that breed in Central Asia and cross over the Himalayas. A lot of the migratory flyways fly around the Himalayas because a lot of the birds can't manage that flight. But the demoiselle cranes fly over the Himalayan mountains, some of them as high as 8,000 meters on their migration. And there is one particular population which started coming to this one particular village called Kichan in Rajasthan. And what happened was, in the 70s, some of the villagers in this village of Keechan started feeding the cranes around their houses. And slowly that population built up. And today we have over 80,000 cranes that visit this village every day in the winter months. So imagine this, the birds breed in Central Asia. They fly over the Himalayan mountains, and almost every one of them, of these 80,000, return every year to this one particular village in Rajasthan and follow the same routine throughout the winter months. That is from November to March. So in the mornings when we go there, we see the birds flying around the village, and the villagers have already put the bags of grain on the ground, and the cranes circle for a bit, and then they descend. They start feeding, and they feed for about a few hours in the morning. And that is a brilliant sight, because all you see when 80,000 cranes are below you or around you is just a clash of heads. There are heads everywhere. And the one good thing about watching so many birds is, especially in this case, is that the demoiselle cranes are really, really beautiful birds. I mean, you see one, you're like thrilled, but imagine seeing 80,000 of them descend on you from all sides. And this is a winter migration spectacle, albeit not entirely authentically natural history oriented. It is, of course, human influence, but it's one of the positive stories that we still have from remote corners of India. So once they're done with their feeding, they take off again and then go and disperse around the wetlands which surround this village. So this is probably one of the natural wonders on the planet, almost as comparable as what we see in Nagaland with our moor falcons. And you can see the picture here, how beautiful these cranes actually are. And 80,000 is the highest number, I think, was recorded 2 years ago. The number switches between 75, 80,000 in that village. And there are people in that village who still take care of the cranes, still feed them. And tourism, in a way, helps them constantly keep their funding okay to feed the cranes on a regular basis. And apart from that, they also treat the cranes, the injured ones, every year when they spot one. So this is a very, very interesting and beautiful human wildlife story that couples the spectacle of winter migration of birds. But not all human wildlife stories, as we know, are positive. So one of the most iconic birds in the Thar Desert, that is Western India again, is the great Indian bustard. So this is one of the heaviest flying birds on the planet, and these birds once roamed all across the country in desert land and grassland areas, but now the population is restricted to certain parts of Rajasthan, and there are very, very few birds left. I think the last estimate was close to 100 birds or 150 birds left. What is happening here is a lot of these birds move between different parts of the desert. Some of them are protected, some of them are not. They are hunted from time to time. There's a lot of windmills. We always talk about green energy as being good, but interestingly, it can be different when you look at it from a different perspective. Like, for example, in southern Africa, the windmills harm the blue cranes, the Karoo blue cranes, and the raptors that fly through. And in India, we've lost a lot of the bustard habitat and the bustards directly to the blades of the windmill. And apart from that, the high tension wires that cross the desert also electrocute the bustards. So here is in the same area of Keechan, where the demoiselle cranes are protected and nurtured and conserved, right in the next village or right in the next surrounding areas of the desert, you have one of the most beautiful, one of the most charismatic birds of our country being pushed towards extinction right in front of our eyes. And captive breeding has started now, but let's see where that goes for the great Indian bustard. So we've seen a positive story of birds and people. We've seen what could possibly be a detrimental effect of people on birds. But not everything is so black and white. And for this, I'd like Conan to bring about a story from the floodplains.
Sure. Thanks, Surya. I was actually happy last week. We had a sort of a landmark ruling by our top court in the country when it comes to protecting a specific habitat for the bustard. And we wait to see where that goes. New areas being earmarked, and new methods have been earmarked to get rid of high tension wires. So let's see where that goes.
Yes.
Let's move further east to look at some of the areas or the influences humans and these birds have had. Now, as we covered very briefly earlier, so the floodplains starting at the foothills of the Himalayas, they start from central northwest India and go all the way east to the border of Myanmar. Now, the floodplains, in comparison, I would compare it to the savannas of Africa in terms of large mammals and numbers of wildlife you see there. And so a picture like this is very typical. You have large water bodies, you have grasslands, you have thick forests, evergreen forests at the foothills, and then as you climb higher up, it gets into coniferous forests as well. Now, the floodplains are extremely fertile land, and we've looked at massive rivers when we talk about the Gangetic river system and the Brahmaputra river system combined together. This is a massive, I think probably the third largest river system in the world.
Yep.
And so imagine these huge rivers bringing these mineral-rich alluvial soil and fanning them out into these plains. So the soil is extremely rich and very fertile and hosts these massive trees, trees which can get into enormous girth, which is brilliant when we talk about species such as the hornbill, which rely on these really tall trees which excel in canopy and need that massive girth and also the fruit-bearing capabilities and specifically girth to build their nest. Now, the great hornbill, as you see here on the right, stands about 3 feet tall. It's a big bird, and they have this interesting nesting feature where the female holds herself up in a tree hollow and seals herself inside, and the male feeds her through this little hole, just a small opening, and that's when you see them go out, collect whatever they can, be it fruit, be it sometimes reptiles or small birds. Yeah. So the floodplains are a hornbill paradise. We see so many species come in so many shapes and sizes and colors. Now, there's also been an influence of being prime fertile land. It's also always in the process for agriculture, and a lot of the Terai, it's some of the densest populated places on the planet because of the fertile and its capability to produce excellent crops. So we have a lot of people there, and with the movement of people, it has also shaped the landscape. So wetlands have been carved out, and fields have come in, and huge agricultural holdings have come in places what have been wetlands. Now, when we talk about changing thing, I would like to talk about the story of the greater adjutant stork. Now, given it's not the prettiest bird, in fact, if you read some of the old records, there is debate. Yes, some of the old records of the adjutant stork are very unkind in its description of them. But it is a huge bird. It's a large bird, and predominantly forms a very important service, that is scavenging. Now, it was such an important scavenger that the city of Calcutta actually had them as a logo on their municipal badge, and they used to be so common around cities. And now there's less than 250 of them across, and they're isolated to about 3 breeding pockets, two in India and 1 in Cambodia. And one of the best places to see them is outside the garbage dump out of a city in the east of India called Guwahati. And what's happened here is while they formed an important role, a lot of people were unkind in their approach to these birds, and through history. So they've lost a lot of their nesting sites, lost a lot of their feeding sites. But again, thanks to the work of a few individuals, I must say, and some government plans, that people are now looking at these birds in a different light and looking at how important their ecological role is. Now, going on to a bird that's closely related is the white-bellied heron. Now, here again, this is a heron that lives in these pristine, fast-flowing rivers that come down the Himalayas. It's the second largest heron in the world, so it's a really tall bird and will often stand mid-river hunting for prey in these fast-flowing streams. And again, something that has really upset the balance and reduced this bird to again to a few hundreds is the hydrological projects that happen all across the subcontinent. So loss of habitat, loss of areas where they can nest, and rising water levels has proved again disastrous for this truly magnificent bird. Now, when we move further down into the plains, there are two species, one mammal and one bird we like to talk about. Now, starting with the rhino. Now, the rhino was pushed to the brink of extinction till about 40 years ago. And when it's only through a concerted conservation effort by numerous parties, government, non-governmental agencies such as WWF and so on, that this animal, this majestic animal has made a comeback. Now, as part of the conservation effort, apart from earmarking large swaths of land, grassland, for this animal, was also controlling or management of the grassland. Now, it is shown that the grasslands, of course, we know go through cycles. They dry out during the dry months. And so in order to promote newer growth, the Forest Department undertakes a process which is called controlled burning. Now, we see that a lot across India. It's part of the forest management plan. It promotes new growth, new grasses come out, which the rhinos and water buffalo and stuff like that need to eat. Now, unfortunately, while this was all good for the rhino, it wasn't very great for a species of bird known as a Bengal florican. Now, the florican is closely related to the bustard, not as large as the Great Indian bustard, much smaller, but they have this amazing courtship display. Now, this display again is evolved because of the tall grasses they inhabit. And so they're solitary to most of the year, and females and males are often in different places. The males are very, very territorial. And so what you're looking here is a composite image of the male's display. So they start off by this little show and dance, roughing up of feathers and displaying of wings, and they undertake this huge jump, presumably to get really high above the tall grasses. And then you see this white flash of wings, which the female presumably can see from a distance and through the grass. And so she's got this good aerial view. And so the male makes himself very, very conspicuous, so the female can then pair up with him to mate. Now, in short grasses, the florican obviously doesn't do very well. So when we looked at a very good intention on one side for an iconic mammal, we have lost a little bit of the effort towards a bird. Now, in the same region, the Northeast is teeming with diversity, with immense amount of of shapes and sizes and different colors. Really, looking at the really gorgeous broadbill, which on the top right, to the smallest woodpecker piculate, and one of the smallest raptors in the world, the pied falconer. And these are birds which are truly representative, but none so much as in recent decades we've discovered, which is truly exciting because, as far as I remember, this is the only bird, I'm sure you'll echo this, the same, a species that we've discovered newly in our lifetime, which is the Bugun's leochicla. Now, the leochicla is a very skulky, very, very shy bird, and it's found in this very, very small region. It doesn't have a great range. It's found in a very small part in the eastern part of India on the border of Bhutan. And in 1996, some researchers discovered this bird. They described it, and it wasn't until about 10 years later that it actually got the distinction of a new species. Now, unlike a lot of science that we've seen in the past, or a lot of descriptions of birds that used to happen, where you would rely on a type specimen, which means capturing the bird and well, a killed specimen and then studying it closely. We couldn't do this because we didn't know how many individuals were there. And at that time, it was probably about 3 or 4 pairs. And I think now there's probably just about 14 or 15 pairs that has been counted in that area. But the amazing part about where this bird was found it was close to wildlife sanctuary, but wasn't really in a protected area, but was found in a community forest called of a particular a tribe that lived there called the Bugun. Now the Bugun are a tribe that lives in very close relation to the forest. They see the forest as probably the most important priority, apart from even maintaining their own cultural identity, because the forest provides for them and therefore we must give back. Now, this bird is found and until date recorded just in this community preserve, and which in terms of stories, I think is a brilliant, at least in recent memory, way where a community, which now the same community is now advocating the case of the bird and continuing to protect its forest and allow people to come in and look at it. But similarly, we have these lovely pockets of great biodiversity and great species richness across the country. And apart from the Northeast, another amazing hotspot for this is the Western Ghats. And this is where we are, and this is where Surya calls his home. So why don't you tell our folks about a little bit of birds we can see in the Western Ghats?
Sure. I think in the last 3 minutes from one part of the country, we know about 3 critically endangered birds and 1 new species, and that's pretty much sums up the story of India's conservation and wildlife. Yeah, there is more good news, luckily. So the Western Ghats, we were just talking about the Western Ghats. Thanks for bringing me on, Conan. So the Western Ghats is the mountain chain that hugs the western coastline of India. That's what you see to the extreme west, that is of the inverted triangle. And this is a very, very different kind of forest. So the Western Ghat forests are actually known as a shola habitat. That's a local term for the forest, the shola. And one distinct feature about this shola forest is that it is a lot of grassland with actual stunted woodland, wet rainforest kind of woodland in the valleys. So what is interesting about this, why I'm trying to specifically mention this, is because of this separation of grassland forest has also created a lot of isolated forest patches, which are separated sometimes by many, many hills of grassland. And apart from this separation, the Western Ghats is also a slightly discontinuous mountain range. So what happens is there are many gaps in the mountain range, which create barriers for species movement. So Conan just mentioned the Bugun leochichla, which is one of the recent discoveries of a new bird for our planet, definitely for our country, India. But it was not the last bird to come up as a new species. But the way speciation was discovered in the current case, which I'm going to mention, is very, very different. So this is the inside of a shola forest. It's a very, very dense woodland habitat. A lot of wet forest floor, high biodiversity forest, lots of frogs, lots of snakes, butterflies, dragonflies, and of course, a whole lot of birds and mammals. So imagine a forest like this being separated from the next forest by a few miles of grassland. So that is pretty much what the Western Ghats is. And to put this in perspective, a couple of scientists in early 2010 decided to look at this particular bird. So this is called a sholakili, which is found across the southern Western Ghats. So the southern Western Ghats is a series of discontinuous mountain ranges, and this bird was found all across those mountain ranges, as in the shola forest. When they studied this bird, they realized that are they actually looking at the same species when they look at the bird in different mountain ranges of southern Western Ghats? And after many years of study of their call, their anatomy, their morphology, their behavior, and of course certain parts of their structure, they realized that this bird, because of these gaps in the mountains and because of the separation of the showlands, has evolved differently in different mountain ranges. So what was once thought to be a single species of Sholakili, now we have three: the Ashambu Sholakili to the extreme left, the white-bellied Sholakili to the center, and the Nilgiri Sholakili to the right. So this is a very, very different kind of speciation. The Bougainvillea kichla is actually a brilliant new bird that came about out of the blue in the forest. But here we have new species that was staring at us for many years, and all it required was for a couple of scientists to go in and look at them closely, and they realized they've actually evolved to be different species. So this is a case of speciation because of geological or spatial isolation. And it wasn't restricted only to the Sholakilis. It was also found in another group of birds called the Chilapans, which again formed 2-3 species groups when the studies were completed. So this is a very, very interesting way to look at birds and birding. We think we know all there is to know, but studies like this come and surprise us and tell us, look closer, look harder, and enjoy the process of birding and observe more. So there's a whole lot of things happening, like we heard about the beautiful story of the Khitan, where the cranes and the people have lived together for many, many, many decades. And then we heard about the bustards, the critically endangered greater adjutant storks, and the white-bellied heron. The greater adjutant stork in one way has learned to adapt to the trash dumps, where the white-bellied heron is not able to adapt to the hydroelectric projects and is dying out. So there are all these stories. There will be solutions to them, but only when we look closely and learn to appreciate, firstly, learn to appreciate the birds. And one thing is clear is birding cannot be separated in any way in India.
Yeah.
What do you say, Conan?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Surya. When you say, you said it well, is that you have to look hard, you look intensely, and I think for me personally, if I would say, certainly looking at birds while you're out on a trip out in nature certainly makes up for good time. It keeps you engaged, and this is the case for you as well. If you were ever to come to India, or you have been to India on safari, apart from amazing species of mammals such as snow leopard we see here, we also look at birds. Not only does it just help us pass the time and keep us engaged on those wonderful drives, but in this case here, birds are an important indicator to tell you what or where to find certain things. Like here, you always look at magpies, which will indicate whether a snow leopard's on a kill, or crows in a jungle will indicate whether a leopard or a tiger has made a kill. But as an indicator, not just to its other colleagues in the jungle, but they're a good indicator of the health of the environment as well. They're plentiful. They occupy a lot of niches. So looking at birds certainly gives you a better picture of what the overall state of the environment is. And of course, while traveling in India, you'll always have this extremely rare spotted, what do you call this, Surya?
The fan-tailed deer.
The fan-tailed deer. Yeah, it's some of our truly iconic, our national bird, yes, and our most prolific deer perhaps across the country. But going out, you can always be entertained by the wealth of wildlife that is here in the country. And it's not just in the natural spaces. Growing up in a city such as Chennai, as you see in the pictures here, urban areas are great spots once you know where to look, and once you develop that interest. It's a great, not only makes for a great weekend or a great morning, but it also shows the ability of some birds to adapt, because they've been probably coming to the region far, far, far longer than what humans have been there. And in spite of all the development and urbanization we see around us, scenes like this of seeing flamingos with the city skyline in the background are still common.
No, I think, Conan, you're absolutely right. I don't think we can separate birding, from wildlife watching, or even living in any way in India, because birds are all over. Like you said, they've learned to carve themselves out of every single niche that is available. And I think one of the best reasons to watch birds when you're on safari is that the number of things you get to see on a safari increases tenfold, because you can only have so many mammals in a forest patch. I mean, for us, birding is a lifestyle. We love to go every time we have a little bit of a spare time. We just go out. We always have binoculars around our necks when we are around. And to be very, very honest, these birds literally kept me sane during the course of the India's COVID lockdown. So this pair of blue-bearded bee-eaters were nesting barely 50 meters that way to the right. And I was stuck in this house throughout lockdown. And luckily, I was a bird watcher. And I came across the nest where these birds reared this chick on the mud bank of a stream. That the chick is to the left, peeping out of its nest hole. And they were feeding it insects. They were bringing it different kinds of things. I saw the chick first be very, very cautious while poking its head out, and later much bolder, and eventually it flew out. I mean, I killed 3 months of time watching this, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I think birding is a lifestyle. It's a very healthy lifestyle, and citizen science, as we saw from all the slides above, makes for a huge, huge contribution. So birds, bird stories, birding, all of that goes hand in hand with a lot of things that you can do in the wilderness and outside. So I'd like to finish off with this particular bird. I think everyone who's come to India on safari will be familiar. This is a bird which can actually transform a person from being a casual safari goer or a mammal enthusiast to a bird enthusiast, because it is a bird that you see most often on safari. It's the most well-behaved bird in many ways. It doesn't fly away very often, and you see it well, and you appreciate the colors. This is the Indian roller, and the story is the same in Africa.
Yeah.
The lilac-breasted roller is the most commonly seen bird, and I think this is where the journey starts for a lot of people who visit India to become birders and to hear more about birds and bird stories. Thank you so much for listening in.
Thank you,
and we'd like to see if you have some interesting questions for us.
Yeah. Over to you, Colby.
Thanks, guys. That was wonderful. I love your insider stories, and I really appreciate the diversity and the images that you've chosen have been fantastic. I think it's really showcased what India has to offer. So thank you. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the questions field that's in your GoToWebinar control panel. Some folks have been doing that all along, and I do have some questions pulled out. Let's start with just a couple random bird questions. The cranes that you were showing, do they mate for life?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah. Well, they have been known to pair up for their lifespan. In fact, there is a lot of, not just folklore, but a lot of study that shows species of cranes, especially the Sardis crane, which is another common crane in our wetlands, that the mate doesn't do very well when the partner dies or is injured and can't and eventually dies. So actually a lot of community conservation work around certain villages have gone to protect these cranes. So when they see a pair such as these, they will always make sure that there's no hindrances around, such as wires and stuff like that could injure a crane. So yes, some species do. That's the short answer. They do pair for life.
Great. Here's another one for you. What defines a bird as a raptor?
Okay, that's a good question. So raptor literally means it's a Greek word which translates to seize and carry away. So that's what raptor means. So a raptor is a bird that uses its talons to catch prey. So a stork or a crane, even if it kills a snake, a fish, or a frog, is not a raptor because it uses its bill, but a raptor will, which is basically owls, eagles, falcons, hawks, etc., etc. They use their talons to catch prey. So that's what a raptor is, to seize and carry away. That's the definition.
Very good. Thinking about conservation, you had mentioned India's rivers being a wonderful corridor for bird watching. Some folks are curious, knowing that there's some pollution in rivers, especially like the Ganges, where you were speaking about. Is that affecting birds in the area? And if so, what's being done about that?
Yeah, it is. In fact, specifically to the Ganges, there is a massive cleanup operation in progress. But it is a massive river. It also has some of the highest, highest density of people living around the banks of the river.
Also.
Industries as well. Yeah. So it is a long way ahead. It's a start, but there's still a lot to go. We have seen some species do a lot well than others. The white-bellied heron, for instance, doesn't do well to human influences on a river. But looking at a river that is just south of the Ganges, a tributary of the Ganges, often its unholy cousin called the Chambal, we've seen some amazing bird life on that river, because it's an often neglected river in terms of industrial importance or human importance. And we've seen
it's just unholy.
And unholy. It's not. It does not have any significance religiously. And then we've just seen species, not just birds, but other like the reptiles such as the gharial and Gangetic river dolphin, just absolutely do very well in those rivers. Do you want to weigh in?
No, I think you pretty much covered it, Conan. I think, yeah, the question is very important. The Ganges looks like a lost cause, but there is a lot of money being pumped in to clean it. But one of the biggest problems, like Conan mentioned about the Ganges, is the number of people that live alongside its very rich, fertile alluvial banks, and the number of industries that have popped up. And also another big problem is, of course, how holy the river is. So it attracts a lot of people. It attracts a lot of waste that comes into the river. So it's not a very clean river system. But a very good example that Conan gave is the Chambal River, which is unholy. It's an unholy tributary of the Ganges. It's almost, the people actually think it's a cursed river. But for us, it's a fantastic place because all the wildlife is still concentrated there. Whereas the Ganges, the main river, which is holy, has lost a lot of its shine in terms of bird life and mammal life.
Yeah. Sorry, just one more. I think the other part of the question was, are there things being done for conservation in general? I think that brings us back to a point about wind turbines and high tension wires. We are seeing, and I think a lot of this is thanks to citizen science and a lot more people now getting involved with environmental work and just the proliferation of information. We've seen like this landmark case last week about taking down high tension wires, which are a major power supply, and finding alternate means such as underground cabling just through the bustard's habitat. So we are seeing some things like that take shape. Of course, I must mention that we are a developing country, so often needs of humans get priority, or development gets priority, and wildlife gets second place. But there is change. We are seeing change, and it's good, at least heartening to see a lot more people involved. I think that's the first, but I think a very, very important step.
Yeah, important indeed. I appreciate your perspective on that too, coming from a developing country, something that maybe a lot of our viewers aren't used to, having to walk those lines from a conservation standpoint. Thanks, guys. Before the hour is over here, there are a number of people curious which trip to go on with you to see all these magnificent birds, and do those go to the areas that you've shared with us today?
All of them. All of them.
Yeah. The one way I would suggest to see all these magnificent birds, for those who ask, is move to India. Even we've been doing that all our lives. But yes, like Anand said, the trips NatHab does gives a good perspective of the bird life in different parts of the country, a lot of which has been covered here in the story. So yes, definitely that is. And if there is a region nearby which is not, and you read up about it, you can always write to NatHab to extend and give you a separate extension to go see that thing with one of us. So I don't see a problem in that. Yeah.
With guides like us and some of our colleagues as well, all of us who lead our India, Nepal, and Bhutan trips are all birders. So if you travel with us, you will see birds at some point or at many points during whatever you trip, whether it's a summer trip to Ranthambore, the Grand India trip, or our trip to Nepal and Bhutan, and of course the new one, the snow leopard trip up to the fantastic region of Ladakh.
Birds and snow leopards. I'm in. I'll see you there. It's one final question for you, and then I'll throw it over for some closing remarks. A few viewers are curious what the best binoculars are for bird watching.
There you go.
Yes, Surya is a Swarovski guy. I'm a Zeiss guy. Swarovski, no doubt, yes, makes some fantastic binoculars. If you're looking at traveling, I would say a good quality binoculars if you're not brand conscious, but good quality 8x32s or 8x42s.
10s also.
10s are good. 10s are good. 8 gives a little bit more stability. 10 gives a little bit more magnification. But most of these roof prism binoculars, I beg your pardon. Roof prism binoculars are compact enough and can take a little bit of rough and tumble in your luggage. Yeah. So something that's compact, preferably waterproof, because it also happens to be a fair bit dust-proof.
Go for the Swarovski NL Pure series, 10x32s or 8x32s. They're fantastic, light, sturdy, and they're very good. And that's what I'm using now, and I absolutely love them. Swarovski NL Pure, the new range that's out.
May not find it tomorrow morning.
Yeah. That was a very specific advertisement. Okay, well, that'll take us to the top of the hour here. How about if I throw it back to you guys for a couple closing remarks? What would you like to say?
Sure. I just want to say at this point, thank you all for joining us. Right now, India is not open for safaris, but we will be open soon, and we live with that eternal hope. But doing something like this and sharing something we absolutely love doing, the two of us, having to share that knowledge with you makes it so worth it. It feels like actually being out on safari and reliving some of those memories just looking at our own pictures sometimes and talking to you good folks. So it's a fantastic experience if you were to come to India. We hope to see you here soon when the country opens up and you're able to travel. And that's all from me, Surya, if you want to.
That pretty much sums it up. Yeah. But I would say something more specific. Go grab your binoculars and start watching birds. That should do. And then come to India soon.
I think that's pretty good advice. Thank you both very much. We really appreciate you being here today. I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in with us today. Don't forget to join us on Monday for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. And one note about next week, we will not be presenting on next Wednesday, so you all have a day off on Wednesday. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude today's webinar. Thanks, guys, and goodbye, everybody.
Good night. Bye.